Genesis 29, about verse 31. This is giving a number of Jacob's children in a matter of very few verses here. All four of the children came, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, all came pretty close together, so before any of the others were born, simply meaning that we're covering, in just a few verses we're covering, it looks like 3.5 to 4 years, that with 9 months per child in the womb. You're going to have it up near probably 4 years of age. Anyway, the oldest one was Reuben. See in verse 32, Leah conceived and bore a son. His name was Reuben. The Lord had looked upon my affliction. What was her affliction? It's called affliction here. Sometimes it's called reproach. It is a matter of not having any children. And some look upon that as a divine reproach. It's fascinating the way that people think, or at least that's still true today, but it's very, very true during Old Testament times. So notice it says in verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, no, he didn't. Leah, the first wife, was not hated in the sense that we use that term so often today. It simply means that the other, Rachel, was favored. And Jacob loved her, wanted her to be the one, as we noted last week. That was his choice. He worked 7 years for her, and instead of getting Rachel, Laban, quite the deceiver, decided that the number one daughter is supposed to go first, along with, I guess, the culture of that day. That was quite prominent. Anyway, we have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, and then later Leah, she left off bearing for a while. Then she came with child number 5 and number 6, who were Issachar and Zebulun. But before those latter two were born, Rachel speaks up, and we get this in chapter 30, starting in verse 1. Rachel, she was the one that they desired to have as his wife anyway. But here's all this for 3.5, 4 years. It's Leah who is bearing children. And so Rachel saw that she couldn't have any children, and so made her envious or jealous of her sister to some degree. Anyway, she said to Jacob, give me the children, or I die, as if it were his fault that she was not able to have children. She was barren too for a number of years, just like Sarah, Abraham's wife, was barren for all of her life, really. Now, I was reading over this morning, and I thought this is significant. Notice how this is worded. Jacob, give me children, or else I die. I jotted a note down to myself. Turn over to Genesis 35 and take a look at a passage here. verse 17. Genesis 35:17. You may want to pencil this in right over here by verse 1 of chapter 30. But notice it says in 35 verse 17, it came to pass when Rachel was in labor that her midwife was Bilhah, and Bilhah said to Rachel, trying to comfort her, no doubt, she was having problems, probably complaining about the pain level. And anyway, Bilhah said, in effect, Rachel, don't worry, don't fear. You're going to have this son also. You're going to have this child. Verse 18. It came to pass as her soul was departing, for she died, giving birth to this second child that she actually bore herself. The first was Joseph. This one was Benjamin. We'll find this a little bit later. But I thought of this verse because she said, give me children or I die. And yet here, when Benjamin was in the process, in the birth of being born, she died. Give me children, and if you don't, I'm going to die. She found out she's going to die either way because she died when Benjamin was born. Okay, go back to chapter 30. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. They're having a husband and wife having a spat here. And so he was upset and he said, am I in the place of God? Verse 2, who has withheld from you the fruit of your womb? Am I responsible for this? And she said to her husband, and I find this difficult to believe. Of course, I was not reared in that kind of society. A lot of that was going on back then, evidently accepted. But Bilhah says, she says, Rachel, about Bilhah, my handmaiden, take her that I can have children by her. Can you imagine such a suggestion? Not in our world, I would hope, but I may have children. She wants children, but I want children. Since I can't have any, I want you to take my handmaid and we'll raise the child. She ended up giving, she ended up giving the names of the children, the ones that bore them. So anyway, that was her suggestion. Now this is about 1750 BC that this is going on. I'd like for you to think with me though, regarding culture and what is accepted at the time. Take a look at a couple of passages in the New Testament. This is a lot closer to our day and age, 2,000 years closer. But go with me to the passage over in Matthew chapter 19. Now here the subject was marriage, primarily, starting in verse 3. But I want to focus now on verse 7. The people are saying to Jesus Christ in the first century, why did Moses give a command to give a writing of divorcement to put away your wife? If we're supposed to be joined for all time, till death do you part, like we say in a lot of ceremonies today. So, since that's true, let not man put asunder what God joins together, and yet Moses gave a writing of divorcement. How do you explain that? Jesus said in verse 8, something that might apply, though the context may be a little different. Moses said, it was because of the hardness of your heart that you were allowed to put away your wives, but from the beginning, that wasn't the way it was with God. From the beginning, it was not so. Now apply that to what we've just been discussing here in regard to Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Bilhah. So here are 4 ladies that he was having children with all at the same time. That would be the first verse. Think about. The next one I was thinking of when I was studying this. Look at Acts 17 and verse 30. Context is different. The context is talking about idolatry. But notice how applicable it is to what we're talking about right now. It's not idolatry. Well, it was back earlier. But notice it says, at the times of this ignorance, like people thinking the Godhead is made out of silver or gold or carved out of wood. And he's right, you know, that is pure ignorance. And yet, God winked at it, or God overlooked it temporarily for a period of time. God overlooked it, but not anymore. Now he commands all men everywhere to repent. Now keep both of those verses in mind as we're studying back here. What went on, God permitted, yes. That doesn't mean God endorsed it or God sanctioned it, that this was God's will. But the people made their decisions, and God went along with the decision that was made up to a point, and then we see God stepping in. Okay, now, as you might expect, Leah's had 4 children, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Probably of that group, 2 are really standing out, and that would be Levi. Why? Because Levi, that was the tribe from which the priests came. This was the priestly tribe. And when it came to dividing up the land, you remember, Levi wasn't included in parceling out the land. The other 11 boys were. Well, Joseph was divided up into 2 groups. But notice Bilhah, this is Rachel, handmaid, starting in chapter 30, verse 6. Rachel says, God has judged me, and he's heard my voice, and he's given me a son. Oh, it was really Bilhah, her handmaid, that had the child, or Jacob's child. But evidently, Rachel went along with it, I would assume somewhat begrudgingly. But anyway, she called his name Dan. And then verse 8 says, verse 7 actually, Bilhah, the handmaid, Rachel's handmaid, conceived a second time and gave Jacob another son, and this one was called Naphtali. And of course, a lot of these children were named after what was going on in their lives. What was going on here? Well, asserted that she had been wrestling with or having some verbal disagreements with her sister, Leah. And so one of the children was named Wrestling. Now keep in mind, as we've said already, these are accepted norms of the day. Rachel decides that she's going to go along with the plan, the strategy, the expedient that Sarah had used. This was Grandpa Abraham and his wife Sarah. Sarah wasn't able to have children nearly all of her life until she's about 90 years old. Then all of a sudden she was able to have a child by God's intervention. But anyway, Rachel decided that this was going to follow the same pattern that Sarah had used with Abraham. She tells Abraham, "You take my handmaid Hagar and have a child by her, and that will be my child." Something maybe we need to mention right here, and that is, it was very, very important to, the more children that you had, the more possibility that you're going to be taken care of in your older age by your children. And also, who's going to do all of the farm work? I mean, look at all the animals that were involved. I was thinking this morning, we have mentioned cattle. Sometimes the word cattle means livestock, but cattle. And then we have sheep and goats are mentioned here in the next few chapters. I would assume that we're talking now about way up in the hundreds, if not thousands, they had, because it was open pasture everywhere, and they grew and grew just like it was down in Egypt later on, when the Israelites kept growing in population and it scared to death Pharaoh. They're going to take over the land. So the more children you have, the more blessed you were. It was the thinking back in those days. So therefore it was accepted. That was probably the major point in Rachel's comments that she's making. But anyway, that child by Bilhah, Rachel would say, "That's my child." That child was regarded legally and morally in those days as her child, even though Bilhah's the one that gave birth. I would call this proxy birth. At least that better describes what we're just talking about here. Naphtali is the one that she names Wrestling, because she had been having a lot of verbal disputes with her sister. Now, notice we're down in verse 9, Genesis 30 and verse 9. Leah saw that she had 4 children, and that's it. She stopped bearing children. And so she wanted to get back in the game. And so she decided, "Jacob, I want you to take my handmaid, Zilpah, and have children by her." So now, I guess they thought that was making progress. And so she bore a child. "A troop cometh." Evidently, there's going to be a bunch more. And so that's what she thought of when she named this child Gad, verse 11 says. And then, after probably about 9 months or close to a year later, Leah's handmaid Zilpah had another child, a second boy, and they named this one Asher. So now there's 4 by Leah and some by Zilpah and Bilhah. So the children are adding up. In case you wondered where all those children came from, now you know. And these are what we call, the sons at least, the children of Israel. Israel was a name that was given to Jacob by God. And so when all these children came on the scene, then you had the 12 children of Israel, the boys. They also had I think it was Leah, had a girl by the name of Dinah. We'll pick this up later. But anyway, what we have here is polygamy. Of course, that polygamy is outlawed here in our country. But all of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Mormon religion. I don't know how many people today are aware that it was considered to be another testament of the New Covenant, another testament other than the New Testament. Well, what they mean by that, when that was advertised that way, the Book of Mormon. My thoughts naturally went to Joseph. Joseph Smith was the leader, so-called prophet of the Mormon religion way back in the middle 1800s, starting about, actually before that a little bit, like 1830, 40, long in there. I decided I wanted to look this up, see how many wives he had, because it looks to me pretty obvious that this Joseph Smith, the so-called prophet of Mormonism, is following the Old Testament pattern that has been done away with when you get to the New Testament. Matthew chapter 19. So what was that pattern? To have as many children as you could have by as many wives as you can have. Joseph had between 30 and 40 wives. A lot of those were also previously married, even at the same time, with their first husband, and he took them as a second wife. And of course, Emma, Joseph's first wife, didn't appreciate any of this. I imagine she felt sort of like Leah and Rachel did. I mean, you're bound to have problems in concubinage or in proxy wives, or we call it today polygamy. Anyway, Zilpah had 2 sons in quick succession here, and the 6th one was named Asher, because she was overjoyed, and this is what his name means, with great joy. Now my husband will love me more. I've given him more children. Strange thinking that some of these people have, but anyway, you see what's going on. Now here's something that's even more strange. Starting in verse 14, Reuben, by this time, is probably about 5 years old, just a young boy. This is not, I mean, it wasn't Jacob who was the farmer. He was more of a rancher. But Reuben was probably maybe they had a neighbor or two nearby that had farmland. And so this young boy may have ambled over there into that neighbor's pastures. It was the day of the wheat harvest, and there were some flowers out in the field, mandrakes, See that in verse 14? He knew Mom, Leah, loved these mandrakes. He loved those flowers. So he pulls them and he brought them to his mom, Leah. Then Rachel says to her sister, here we go again. Rachel says, Leah, verse 14, give me, I pray thee, of your son's mandrake. Let me have some of those mandrakes. And her reply is spiteful, obviously. And she said, is it a small matter that you've taken my husband? Now you're going to take my mandrakes too? Fascinating, but it's jealousy popping up here. And Rachel said, and this is Rachel working it out in her mind. Rachel said, therefore, he will lie, my husband, my Jacob will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. So when Jacob came in from the field, here she runs out to Jacob. And she evidently eager to tell him, and says, Leah runs out and she meets him and says, you must come in unto me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So she made an agreement. Rachel went along with it. Tonight was your night to be with Jacob. Now, this mandrake was a flower-like more like a berry, but had flowers on it. And it was esteemed back in those days as like an aphrodisiac, as something that you would take to be able to perform sexually, aphrodisiac. And they thought it promoted fertility. And so Rachel saw the flowers, she wanted them, and notice how badly she wanted them. She made a bargain with Leah. You can have Jacob tonight if I can have the flowers. Was she hoping? Probably she's hoping that the flowers will help her, enable her to become expectant herself. Now, this was an agreement that they had. Verse 17, God hearkened to Leah. She conceived, and she bore Jacob a fifth son. And then not only was this one born, Issachar, verse 18 says, but Leah conceived again, of course, over 9 months later, and bore a sixth boy, and says, God has given me a good dowry. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have given him so many sons. So she named him Zebulun, because of God giving me this boy. I don't know how much time elapsed, probably not much, between verse 21 and verse 22, but now notice 22. God remembered. Now God did not forget. God doesn't forget. So when you read this, God remembered, doesn't mean that he had forgotten all about her. He hadn't. This is the way Moses writes this in narrative form. This happened, then this happened. Now, God hearkened to Rachel and opened her womb. Now notice, this was not the flowers, the mandrakes, doing this. that was an idea that it was circulating, quite popular back in that day, evidently. But who was really responsible for the fact that she was now able to have a child? God was. God enabled her to have the child. He listened to her, and the term is that she bore this son. And she says, when the son was born, God has taken away my reproach. And so she named the boy Joseph. Now, Joseph is the one that probably, after just a few years, he's going to be the major character in the book of Genesis. But at this point, we have his birth and how all that came about. Okay, now, by this time, Jacob had already fulfilled his contract. 7 years for Rachel, 7 years for Leah, and now he's going to be working, well, we'll find later, a total of 20 years, so 6 for Laban. But anyway, total of 20 years in Genesis 31, verse 38. So, by the time Joseph was born, all of Jacob's obligations to Laban, Uncle Laban, who was his boss, and he opened his home to him, of course, and allowed his daughters to marry Laban. So all of that's fine, and yet Laban was a deceiver himself, a trickster, and Jacob begins to regret, I think, that he made this kind of a deal with his uncle. But Jacob now has a large family. Verse 25, it comes to pass that when Joseph was born, Jacob says, Laban, time's up. I put in my work. Send me away that I can go back to my own country, back to Canaan, some 500 miles west. This is back over near the big Mediterranean Sea. Go back to my country and give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you all these years. And Laban said, I pray thee, if I have found favor in your eyes, wait a while, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me because of you, Jacob. Bless me for your sake. Well, he was right. That man has become very, very wealthy. And then he says, okay, Jacob, you're wanting to go back home. Let's not only talk about it, let's make a deal. If I can use a modern day terminology. So, appoint me your wages. Tell me what it would take. He didn't have any more children or girls to offer as a wife like he did Leah and Rachel. So Laban says, we're talking money now. Tell me what is it worth to you. Appoint your wages. I thought it was interesting, even before, way back years earlier, when he was talking about working for Uncle Laban, Laban lets Jacob do the talking, and then he jumps on the bargain. Same thing here. Tell me what it would cost. You tell me your wages that you expect. So it's him making the proposition once again. Jacob, all he had to do was name his price, but he gave a pretty good bargain. And of course, Laban snapped it up. But now it's as we said, money or probably animals. But most of the animals, Jacob been taking care of them, but they were owned by Laban. Okay, then he says, verse 29, you know, Laban, how I have served you, and how your livestock was with me in charge. For it was little that you had before I came. You didn't have much before I got here. And look how you have increased probably all of your livestock. I looked this up this morning on AI. I thought it was interesting that the term livestock included goats, probably hundreds and hundreds of sheep. But later on, we're going to see that Rachel's getting on a camel, and there are more than one because they're riding it. But Rachel has been riding the camel for a number of years. So livestock involved a lot of different types of animals back then. Anyway, you didn't have much when I got here, and the Lord has blessed you since I came. And now, when shall I provide for my own house? And he said to him, Jacob, what will I give you? What shall I give you? And Jacob said, I don't want you to give me anything. Modern day terminology, verse 31. Thou shalt not give me anything. If you'll do this one thing for me, I will again start taking care of your flock for you. Now here's where the going to me gets a little rough. I can't imagine when I just read this without doing some study, what's going on here, but I'm going to pass through the flock today, your flock. And I'm going to remove from that flock all of the speckled and spotted animals, and among the sheep, the brown cattle among the sheep, the brown livestock among the sheep, and he spotted and the speckled among the goats. That will be what I'll be working for. In other words, he's saying, look, you take all of the animals that are solid color, the browns, not the ones that are speckled, not the ones that are striped. You can have all of those that most people desire, the solid colors, and I'll take the rest. Well, Laban thinks that's another good deal. Verse 34, Laban said, behold, I desire that it will be according to your word. So you've got a deal. Now, this plan doesn't involve Laban giving him anything. Notice he doesn't take Laban's stock, but he's talking about something that's going to happen in the future from now on. When they're born, every time if an animal is spotted, like a paint horse, I guess, if it's striped, we'll put it over here. That'll be mine. But if the animal is solid color, that will be yours. I say it's interesting. So then he's going to separate them into their own flocks that are all normal colored. One, the spotted and the speckled would become his. To me, this is a good deal for Laban. It ought to have been highly favored by Laban, and of course he accepted it. But notice he jumped at the chance, and it appeared unlikely that Jacob's going to get any future animals by this process. Not many, because the only ones that you're allowing to mate, we're going to separate them over here, and they're all going to be the spotted or the other solid color would be going to Laban. But even at this point, it looks like, from when you read the text, it looks like from Laban's point of view that he still was thinking that evidently Jacob is going to cheat. He's going to find some way to cheat me. And verse 35, they start the separation. He removed that day the male goats that were ring-streaked and spotted, and all the female they were speckled and spotted, maybe some white in it, but he is in the process of separating them. I think it's interesting. Read verse 36. And he said, 3 days' journey. How long is a day's journey? Quite a while. And that's what we have here. He said 3 days' journey between himself, between Laban and Jacob. You've got your livestock, and I want to make sure that, well, he didn't say this, but evidently that's what's crossing his mind. He had to have some reason behind he makes this stipulation. There's 3 days' journey between my flock and you. I think if I were Jacob, I'd thought to myself, what do you have in mind? What's going on? Anyway, Laban decided not to trust Jacob, but to go ahead and have the two sets of stock separated from each other. You know, this would make a good modern day movie, wouldn't it? Oh, by chance, have you noticed on advertising on television lately? One movie is about Rachel, another is about Leah, another was about Sarah. So I think it's Fox Network that's putting that this is coming out. If you watch those movies, you probably see some of what we're talking about. But anyway, old Laban wants to keep at least 3 days between the main body of animals and those that were going to be tended by Jacob, the ring-streaked and spotted animals. That was an exercise in distrust. And then you have something that I thought was difficult, starting in verse 37 through 43. He's talking about, in the separation of the animals, verse 40, putting the flocks by themselves. And they had what they called rods, verse 41. I would call this whole process selective breeding. But Jacob, who is way on up in years by this time, he is well versed in farming. He knows ranching. He knows what's going on. And he's watched, evidently, this process of animals and those that were solid color and those that were spotted. So he had some experience there. Also, you find this idea of the aphrodisiac here, that's even mentioned more in the next few verses. When the animals came in to drink, evidently there was something in the trees themselves, and he stripped the bark off of the trees and put that there in the thing. So there was something was going on that had an effect on fertility. Jacob knew that. Okay, thanks for being here. We will pick up chapter 31 next time. That's about 1,940 years before the time of Christ.
And you look okay today. Something nice. Sorry for shooting you a shot.